So today, as a church, this is our last message in the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality series we've been working through. We started 7 weeks ago being encouraged to understand and look at our iceberg inside of us. The pain, unresolved issues and emotions that often swirl around inside of us that stop us from being healthy emotionally and loving well. We've gone on a journey to allow ourselves to validate emotions that we experience, to be encouraged to know our true selves, the unique person that God has made us to be. We look back to see where we've come from has been a part of that. Looking back has been a part of that. How issues of the past generations are often in our tissues. The wall is a place where we are called to journey through at least once in our lives, where we and our faith is often undone. We have more questions than answers, but God in His love is doing an unseen work within us that heals, expands, and frees. Allowing grief and loss to be part of our lives and embracing it and journeying with it has been another part of this course. And last week, Colin looked at the place of the daily office in our lives and the Sabbath, and allowing ourselves to be attentive and contemplative with God. I think there's been so much to cover, hasn't there? And to me, we've only just touched the surface. I know I have really enjoyed the groups that I've been part on. Our group on a Tuesday night has just been amazing. In the people there, of course, because they're amazing, but in what we've shared together, and also the staff team each Tuesday as we've met and looked at this. It's been a great journey, and somehow it's sad we need to be carrying on in this sort of way of reflection that we can go through together, and I'm sure we will. But today, we come to growing as an emotionally healthy adult is the topic. Oh, I need to put this on, do I? Please tell me. Yep. Our topic today and our final one is growing into an emotionally healthy adult, learning to love well. Pete Kazzerio, who has written this material and done his own journey, and many people of you would have seen him on the DVDs you've had in your life groups. He says that loving well is the true essence of spirituality. This requires that we experience connection with God, with ourselves, and other people. God invites us to practice His presence in our daily lives. And as part of that, He invites us to practice the presence of people within an awareness of His presence in our daily lives. The greatest commandment calls us to this. And our greatest commandment, which we're really basing our message on today, is Luke 10:27. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength and your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. I've taken this from the Luke 10 passage where this is mentioned, because that's what we're actually going to be working with today, looking at the Good Samaritan that came out of a question that flowed from when Jesus spoke this. But in Matthew's version of this command, Jesus declared that this was the first and greatest commandment, and the second also, because there's 2 commandments here. So what we're looking at, this is the greatest commandment. This is the greatest call that God has on our lives, to love Him with our total being and to love our neighbour as we love ourselves. But where I want to start today is I want to look at a concept. And it was a concept developed by a Jewish theologian called Michael Buber, I think. It was Buber, definitely. And he said, how do we treat others? Do we treat others as thou or as it? So do we treat others as made in the image of God, as we are? Then they deserve our respect, our dignity, our worth, and their uniqueness is to be valued? Or do we treat people as it's church, they're just a means to an end. We don't really value them. We don't really want to know them. We just use them so we can get our end in mind. Do we see that I see things as right, and if you don't see them my way, you are wrong. So those are the two concepts. When I was 16 years old, a retired missionary came to pastor the church I attended in Invercargill. I stood a bit in awe of him, but came to appreciate that he was a gentleman that had a great interest in others. He cared, inspired, and encouraged. His profound wonder and awe of God's saving grace deeply impacted me. Norman McIntosh had been, with his wife Amy, a missionary, firstly in Tibet. He spent 2 years under house arrest during the Chinese Revolution from 1950 to 1952, along with his wife Amy and only one of their children. They spent time separated from the rest of their children during that time. In fact, their children travelled back alone to New Zealand without them and settled with a family in Geraldine. After that, they spent time as missionaries in Malaysia, Singapore, and then as director of the Overseas Missionary Fellowship here in New Zealand before retiring. I so valued his encouragement of me in my later teenage years. In fact, when I was 17, he called me to a study in his home and told me that the guy I was friendly with was certainly not the right guy for me. And I didn't really obey him particularly well, but I found out he was right. So 2 years later, when Colin and I were about to announce our engagement, I thought I'd better go and tell him. And his response was, "That's great. I've been praying for that." So he journeyed with us, believed in us, gave time and gifts. This is our fruit bowl. He gave us a wedding present on his wood turner out of oak wood with his initials in the back. So he gave us gifts, prayers, and his wisdom as we were married, went to Bible college, and then into pastoral ministry. That commitment to us and that treatment of us as thou did not change when we told him a decision that we knew would deeply disappoint him. No, we were not going to be missionaries in Asia, as was his desire for us. When I attended his funeral, I can remember feeling everyone that spoke of their experience spoke of the experience of him as he valued them. He encouraged them, he blessed them, he supported everyone that came across his path. He honoured them by his actions and his prayers. And everybody felt that they had been treated as thou by him. It was a profound funeral experience. This man knew how to love well. But I want to tell you, as you could imagine, he'd gone through his pain and his inner journey and his walls. Because in the time I knew him, that daughter that shared those 2 years under house arrest was killed along with 3 grandchildren in a tragic accident in Thailand. So he knew pain and loss, but out of that he knew how to love and treat everybody as thou. We have been privileged to have him in our life. But yet we see people treating people as it, don't we? As if they've got no value. I was working at A&E, not my favourite place, never liked working on A&E as a nurse, but I did, at Gore Hospital one Saturday night. 2 young guys came in with their coach, having sustained some injuries from their rugby game they played that day. The doctor on duty was literally nasty to them, telling them what a terrible game it was and how dare they would play it. I knew the doctor's passion was classical music and drama. The coach, though, was horrified and said to me, many young guys had been saved from far worse than playing rugby, by playing rugby, I should say. They had been saved from far worse by being involved in rugby. And Amanda's here, and I know she knows Riversdale well. These are Riversdale rugby guys. And you don't talk negative about rugby to Riversdale rugby guys. But the doctor had treated them like it's. In his opinion, what they were doing was wrong. And certainly he didn't want to engage and understand what rugby meant for them and who they even were as people. They were treated as it that night, and I felt ashamed to be the nurse working with him. I guess I want us just to take a couple of minutes, well, 1 minute, our time's getting on, of when have you been treated as thou or an it? And how did that make you feel? And then to reflect on, how do you treat people? How do you treat people? Do you treat them as thou or as it's? So what we're going to go on to now is looking at the story of the Good Samaritan. And he displays to us qualities of an emotional, healthy adult who treats people as thous. But what I want you to do as I read you this very, very well-known story is to use your imagination, because sometimes we can only hear the words, can't we? We just hear the story. And sometimes we need to put our imagination into the story. And so I want you in the story, as I read it, to either become the man that was attacked and robbed and left for dead, or to imagine what it would have been like for the Good Samaritan. Now, we just need to have a little bit of a background information about that. The road we're talking about, that Jesus talked about, was Jerusalem to Jericho, about 30 kilometres long, descending into the Jordan River, through rocky terrain where robbers could easily hide. It was seen and known as a dangerous road. That's one thing. That's where they were, going around a road like that. We need to know that Jews despised Samaritans. They looked down on Samaritans as lesser than them. And that the Samaritan man would have lived all his life with this reality. We need to understand that the priests and the Levites would have known the Old Testament really well. They were part of the religious people of that day. And it is presumed that the man that was robbed and beaten and hurt was a Jew. So let me read the story. And it comes out of the context of an expert of the law coming to Jesus with the question, how do I inherit eternal life? And he responded with those 2 commandments that I read out before. And then he asked the question, but tell me, who is my neighbour? Jesus went on and told them this story. So imagine yourself either being the one that's being robbed and hurt or the Good Samaritan. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him for dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place, saw him and passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to the inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert of the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." What was the initial reaction of that Good Samaritan when he saw the man lying on the road? What was it? He took pity. Yeah, he took pity. His natural response was, I'm going to help this person. And he wasn't bound up by the fact that this person would have been a person who had despised my culture, my people, for many generations, would have despised them. And he would have known them, and he would have experienced what that despising looked like, that he may have been given lesser opportunities by the Jews, from the Jews, because he was a Samaritan. We don't quite know what exactly how that would have looked, but we know what apartheid looks like today, and there will be some similarities, I'm sure. So this Samaritan man could have quite easily said, no, Jews have absolutely hurt us, rubbished us as a people. I am not going to act in love. But somehow he was emotionally healthy enough to be able to not to be bound up by his negative emotions, his past judgments. He somehow was free to love, and to live in this way and with this response. So he was not bound by his emotions. He had probably done an inner journey. Perhaps his parents had helped him in that. We don't know, but he was not bound by negative stuff going on in his life. And out of that, he was able to treat that man as a thou, as a person of value, a person of worth, a person made in the image of God, a person unique. He gave generously of his resources and time and energy, and he didn't demand anything in return. It was freely given. An emotionally healthy person can love without no strings attached, not demanding anything in back, not demanding any change of whatever. Sometimes I know we want to love people so we can bring them to Jesus, but sometimes that never happens. But will we just love them anyway? But he also knew his limits. He knew that he perhaps couldn't take it home to his own family, that he went to an inn, paid for somebody else to look after him for a certain period of time. He knew the limits of his love. He knew what he could legitimately do. And it's not really read here, it's not really stated here, but I've actually sort of wondered, and you can say I'm wrong in that, but he perhaps respected the Jewish person. You know, did he take him? He could have taken him home to his family, but he knows that that Jew may not have wanted to be near, as a family of Samaritans. So he chose to take him to an inn. We don't know that, but I just wondered if there would be that understanding of that Jew's perspective as he was treated in love. Just a thought. So how do you think the Jew would have felt with this sort of love from somebody that he knew would have, that he has despised and looked down upon? What would be some of your feelings? How would he feel? Shamed, yes, shamed. Yeah, that I've not loved like this, I've despised people like this, yet they will do that for me. Do you think he would have also, beyond the shame, felt a sense of value too? That I was unworth, and just literally cared. I was left for dead. I was vulnerable, and somebody came and helped me and cared for me. I think loving is hard. Treating people as thou is hard. And sometimes we need tools for our everyday life to know how to love well. And I'm going to look at 3 this morning, very briefly. And there's many other ways that we could show love well in everyday life. But today I have just pointed out 3. And the first one is seek to understand, then seek to be understood. And I absolutely love this verse in Proverbs 20, verse 5. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, and a man of understanding draws them out. And all of us have deep waters inside of us that need to be drawn out. And to be people of love, we need to be people who will help draw those waters out in people, the depth, the uniqueness, the value of people out by how we really actually listen to them, how we seek to understand. There's a quote that you've got on your sheets, and it says, "Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable." The fact is, when we are listened to and heard, we feel loved. When we are understood, we feel loved. But sometimes we don't quite have the skills always to know how to do that. And I've just going to go over some of those principles of what we call reflective listening. Things that we can say, phrases we can use to encourage it out. Because so often when we are in conversation with people, when we're just are thinking of our response, aren't we? We're not thinking of how can we bring this person out more, listening to really what they are saying and prepared to ask further questions. We're often just thinking of our own reply or our own inner responses that are going on and not really focusing on the other person and treating them as thou. So on your sheet you'll find some of those, and we're just going to speak to them. This has come out of Toolbox parenting courses. This is good strategies in our parenting of helping our children deal with their own emotions and bring out situations for them. But it's for all of us. It's for all of us. It's to speak in a warm tone. A warm tone is a very inviting tone. It's that sense that this person really wants to listen and understand me and where I'm at. And as we go through, it's good to have some repeat back so that we've actually heard what they're saying, using phrases like, "It sounds as if." And this one I've got written here of shows you're still listening, but it gives space for that person often just to say something more. "It seems like" is a good reflective back question. And another, "Are you saying?" Sometimes we can invite them to add a picture. What does that look like for you? And then to keep it going, is there anything else? And to actually incorporate some of these into our ways of listening and in our conversations helps draw people out. If anybody's interested, this is a very good article called "Listening, a Sacred Art and a Spiritual Practice." And if you want to more on this, This has got so many strategies in it that I'm happy to photocopy it off for you. And then seek to understand, and in a mutual relationship, many relationships are just one. I had a phone call yesterday of just somebody wanting to talk about a few things that had happened, and all I was there was to seek to understand and to bring her out and to hear the things that she needed to talk about. And that was okay. But then we, in mutual relationships, when we're trying to work through something, we also need to seek to be understood. So the person that's been understood needs to then seek to understand the other person so that relationships are developed. And the next way of loving well is be careful making judgments. And we go back to the commandments. You shall not give a false witness against your neighbour. And we're very good at making judgments. We can look at an action and we can judge that person quite easily, quite quickly in our minds. I'm very good at that. I can remember Jerry Caserio, when I went to the conference with her, she spoke about this. And she said, just a simple example, and I'm sure you can relate to it, that she asked that a notice would be put in the newsletter, and she gave it to the office lady, and when she arrived at church one Sunday, it wasn't in the newsletter. So she said, my judgment could be, wow, she's just hopeless, isn't she? She can't do her job. You know, we should fire her or whatever. You know, we can go off in our head, and we're making we're being a false witness about that person because we don't know what went on. And sometimes we need to go back a step and use phrases like, I am curious, I am puzzled. So for Jerry not to make a judgment, but just to go to the administrator and say, I'm just puzzled that my notice never got in the newsletter. What happened? And it could just be simple, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, you know, but no judgment needs to be made. And often we're very good at making judgments instead of just respecting a person as they are and knowing that we all make mistakes. And that's part of being an emotional, healthy adult, is that we can accept other people's imperfections and no mistakes are made. But we don't have to go and judge them for that and say terrible things about them in even our own mind. We can just say, I'm just going to say, I'm curious, I'm puzzled, I'm perplexed, can you tell me? And the relationship then is kept all intact. And the final thing is be aware of our unconscious triggers. Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Often when we're in conversations or in relationships, things will go off in us and we have no idea where they come from. I remember doing a toolbox some few years ago now, and a woman was there, a mum, she was, and she said, my father, if I did something wrong, which I never often knew what it was, he wouldn't talk to me for weeks following that. And he was an elder of the church. And that was for him his unconscious trigger. He would, we don't know what would it be. It could be that how dare my daughter displease him, whatever. She was in counselling for that today at that time because as a child, love was withdrawn. And for her, that was so hard. But it was her father's, a trigger that went off inside of him that did that. And she, till this day, when I was talking to her, did not know. I know a few weeks ago, I was talking to Colin about something, and how you have new little revelations in life, and I was really excited, trying to, say to him, this is a new bit of insight I've had. And he did a very matter-of-fact statement. And you know what my initial reaction was? To go silent. well, I'm not going to share with him again. How dare he treat me like this? Which is my unconscious trigger. I'll always do that if I am feeling as if I'm not being listened to. So therefore it stops our relationship, and it means he didn't know what he'd said. And so we all have these triggers that go off in us, which means we don't always love well. We don't love the other person well. That father didn't love her daughter well. I didn't love Colin well that night. And I'm afraid it wasn't the first time I'd done that. So I haven't loved him well throughout our marriage at times. So I guess we need to sometimes look at those triggers that go off, because sometimes we just think it's normal response. This is how I am. How dare you think it could be wrong? But we need to see, well, how does that affect the other person? That's just who I am, but is it loving towards the other person? Does it treat the other person as a thou? Or does it treat the other person as an it? And we need to be aware of that and ask the Lord to search us, because sometimes we do not know even where they come from ourselves. We do not even know what they are. But we don't want to have offensive ways in us, but we want to be people that can go of a path of life, an everlasting life, but a life in all its fullness. I know that loving like this is really hard, isn't it? I think Jesus gave us a really hard commandments when he said to love him with our total being, to love others as ourselves. It seems actually impossible. And yet that is the call upon our life as his followers. So I just want to lead us in a prayer now of just asking for forgiveness where we haven't loved well, and then for asking for his power to love well. Shall we pray? Lord, I come to you, we come to you in surrender, knowing at times we haven't loved well. We have not loved one another as thou, with respect, dignity, valuing each other's worth, uniqueness, as made in the image of God. Lord, we need your forgiveness. We need your grace. You command us to love you with our whole being and to love our neighbour as we would ourselves. Lord, you command us here to something that at times just seems so impossible, so hard, beyond our human ability. We acknowledge this morning we need your strength, your courage, your Spirit's power. We so need your grace. In Jesus' name, amen.